Good afternoon to everyone that has joined us so far. Thank you so much for joining this conversation today. I would like to welcome the Common Future Conversation community members to this careers chat with myself and my colleague James Nixey. Just a reminder that the event is on record and the webinar will be recorded. The discussion today will be around careers and what we're focusing on today, in addition to the questions that you sent through, and we'll probably ask later on in the Q&A. We'll be looking at how to shape fulfilling careers in international affairs, how the coronavirus pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement are changing and will continue to change careers as we know them. And I think from my point of view, as well as James, we'll be looking at key skills and experience that we consider essential in a role within a think tank or international affairs. My name is Nonie Dube, in-house recruiter at Chatham House, and I am joined today by my colleague James Nixey, who is the head of the Eurasia program and the head of the Euro program. We will kick off with James and I talking about our careers to date, after which we will turn to the questions asked through the chat. Please can I ask you to submit any questions that you have through the chat function. When we turn to see these questions, I would invite people who've asked questions to turn on their cameras and unmute themselves. If you prefer to ask your questions anonymously, then please feel free to do so, and we will answer those as best as we can. And so to kick things off, I will start by inviting James to talk about his career progression for about 5 minutes. So essentially, where did it all start for you, James, if you can kick off now?
Right, thanks so much, Nonie. It's really, really good to see you and everybody else. It's very exciting for me, so I appreciate the opportunity. I'll try to make the most of my 5 minutes, but do stop me if I go over. I can see it's about 5:04 right now. Okie doke. So listen, I should tell you, where did it start? Well, obviously, I am a career Russianist, to be honest with you. I started out, look, I'll be honest, I'm 45 years old. When I was 12 years old, in 1987, Gorbachev was coming to power in Russia, and I was offered Russian or Latin as a second language other than French. So even as a 12-year-old, it was kind of no competition, Latin, Russian. It just, things were moving in Russia in those days, glasnost, perestroika. So I started the language. I carried on with the language. I started to go to Russia as a gap year and exchange. You know, I became more and more into it. You either get the bug with Russia or you don't. And then I did the degree. I did a master's degree, etc. And then obviously after that, you're in the employment market and you're desperate and looking for something. So what happened then was I had a brief spell in a bank, which I hated. I can't tell you. I lived in Russia for a bit and I've done all that other stuff. Worked for this bank, couldn't bear it, resigned from a bank, and I sat in Hyde Park in London for about 3 months going for job adverts in the paper, because that's what it was in those days. This was the year 1999, 2000. And, you know, the job at Chatham House came up and I honestly didn't know anything about it. So, you know, as I say, I was about 24 in those days. And I barely knew what a think tank was. Yes, I'd done an international relations degree, so I ought to have done, but I was not particularly au fait with such things. So I came on board at what we call in Chatham House as a program administrator, which effectively is quite an administrative job. There's no content, no substance. Yes, I had the language. Yes, I'd done a politics degree, but that was not my role. My role really was more photocopying and coffee making, quite frankly. You know, some budgets and some invitations by post in those days, not an email. And but I sort of learnt about the business and about project management and of course about the content, almost by whatever you call waking osmosis, naturally. And my mentors, and it's so important to have a mentor. I had several bosses who were the heads of a program before me, 3 in fact. I sort of outlived them in a way. And eventually, I think they felt that they were so fed up of trying to recruit a new program head every time that they gave it to me. And I've been the program head since 2012, 2013 now. Program director, they call it these days, but it's the same thing. So that's how it works in terms of career progression and how I got to this place. As Nonie mentioned, I also have just recently taken on the Euro program, but that is not because I show any ability in Europe whatsoever, but merely because I need to find some synergies, some connections and some links between my area of a former Soviet space and Europe. They are, of course, geographically coterminous, even if they're not geopolitically coterminous, if that makes any sense. But we need to see what we can do there as we reorganize the internal structure of Chatham House in that respect. So that gives you, I mean, I can go into that in more detail. Yes, so I mean, I think just the key points are that language is very important, having the Russian language or whatever area you are in. But another thing, the final thing I want to say, so as not to take up too much of my 5 minutes or too much time, is that the other key part of my education, other than the academic education, and I know somebody asked about that in the questions, and we can come to those, of course, but is the travel. And I spent quite a lot of time in the region, just traveling around like some idiot student, you know, backpacking or on trains, going from country to country, from around the South Caucasus through Central Asia. And that did give me a real appreciation for the differences between these places. They're not all the same. They are different languages, cultures, cuisines, technologies, you know, ethnicities. And I came to respect the differences in a way in which I simply was ignorant about beforehand, even with a couple of degrees under my belt. So the travel, which I was given the opportunity to do basically in my gap year and in my and also beginning in Chatham House when I was an administrator, and I went on these sort of you know, conferences, not so much to speak as I do now, but really to do the admin and to do the money and such like. And just in doing that, it exposed me to this whole new world, which, you know, I was quite Moscow-centric beforehand, if that makes any sense, quite Russia-centric. And the appreciation for the other countries, the Ukraines, the Kazakhstans, or, you know, the Georgia's world, you know, that really was a very developmental experience for me in that respect. So I hope that's kind of my 5 minutes, I think, Nonie. But obviously, I'm very happy to talk about that in as much detail as you or anybody else likes. But I'll just hand it back for now.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, James. So my career obviously is totally different to yours. And I think my development, again, slightly different. But essentially, I joined Chatham House at the beginning of this year. Prior to that, I worked for KPMG, again, doing recruitment, and focus obviously on an entirely different market, where my target market, or the people that I was recruiting, were basically worked in tax and management consulting, as well as in the actuarial space. And the change in that, and the reason I changed, I thought I got to a point where I'd done quite a bit of recruitment for different companies with different markets, and I thought, you know, it was time to change gear, as you like to say, and move into a different market. And made my application to Chatham House, which I was aware of, however, wasn't as knowledgeable as I should have been. But I got to learn a little bit more in my preparation, and I was successful for this role. So as you can imagine, with an institution like Chatham House, our focus is usually more on the research side of things, again, focusing on candidates with skills and experience across various programs, as well as, you know, the operational side. So, and within the time that I've joined, I've seen how the market has rapidly changed, largely as a result of coronavirus, and how that's impacted working life, and, you know, the emphasis that it's put on the need to develop and enhance ourselves through, you know, career development and through upskilling ourselves. So that is where I am today. In terms of my educational background qualifications, do I need, you know, were those essential for this role? Absolutely not. However, for me, my qualifications were purely out of interest. So I studied psychology and criminology at the University of Westminster to begin with, and I then did my postgraduate in organizational and industrial psychology. The emphasis there, I always saw myself in a role which focus more on organisation and transformation and human resources was my aim and my focus. So that is where that's where I started, and I'm really excited to get into the questions that you have sent over to the platform, that both James and I will tackle as best as we can. As I mentioned earlier, we will have an opportunity for a question and answer time towards the end. So if you can pop through your questions through the chat function, and I will also invite people to ask their questions live if they are happy to do so. So if we can start off with the questions that we have received. I think we've had a look, and there's some really interesting questions, thought-provoking questions, I think, for myself. I don't know if James feels the same, but definitely very keen to get into a discussion around those. So I think one of the questions or one of the themes that seemed to come across quite a bit were common mistakes on CVs. Obviously, working in the role that I work in now, I see a lot. James, I don't know if you want to throw in some things that you've come across in CVs that you've seen that were an absolute no-no, or that you would rather have not seen.
Well, I don't have your experience, Nonie, but the thing that always makes me laugh is because obviously I often see a lot of CVs from my area of the world, and in my area of the world, as in the former Soviet Union, then it is commonplace to put your photo on a CV, and in the West, I was always taught not to. In the UK, that is. So I'm asking you, Nonie, in a way, because I don't know, but to me it always seems a very odd thing to do. I'm uncomfortable with it personally, because you wouldn't want it to prejudice you in any way. But it's a cultural thing. So you shouldn't let it prejudice you that they do have one, because they're not doing it to show off. But equally, I just wouldn't do it. I mean, but tell me what you think.
I agree in that it does make me slightly uncomfortable. Again, taking on board different cultural perspectives and requirements. But I can say in my role here and in the roles that I've had so far, photos on CVs have never been a requirement, because in my position, my main focus throughout the selection process is always based on skills and experience. So if there was something that I would, rule out from CVs, that it would definitely be photos. And I think some mistakes that I commonly see, again, it could be many reasons, but I think CVs are documents that are documents where we market ourselves, brand ourselves, introduce ourselves to potential employers. And common mistakes that I see include typos. Again, we can do things in a rush. However, if we are looking for someone who has good attention to detail, that could be the deal breaker. And, in terms of the first impression, what we tend to see is contact details missing. So if we like your CV, we like your profile, if we don't have a phone number or an email address to get back to you on, it will be difficult to progress with the process. Those are the main ones, and I think if we expanded across to cover letters, mistakes that I also find in cover letters, which I think from in my role, cover letters are a good way of branding and marketing yourself. That's you putting your best foot forward and convincing me and my team to hire you. And a common thing that I see in cover letters is candidates sending over a cover letter with the wrong job title. If you are really passionate about Chatham House and, for example, a program coordinator role in Chatham House, then that should be reflective in your cover letter. What I don't want to see is if you're applying for a program coordinator, but refer to the role as a research analyst. It's two different things. And again, it's that attention to detail that we're looking for, because obviously working in the research world, those are key skills that I think we all look for. Attention to detail is one of the top few ones. And cover letters have changed. They don't have to be generic. You can tailor your cover letter to basically reflect your skills, reflect your experience, talk about you, why do selling your unique selling point, what makes you stand out from every other CV that I'm receiving every day. So my advice would be, let's pay a little bit more attention to the cover letters and look at them as a branding tool as opposed to just a requirement as part of an application process.
Can I say one extra thing?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to say that for what it's worth, and I don't know about you, Nonie, but when I'm looking at CVs, I'm not especially impressed by Oxbridge or by degree class. I mean, obviously, you have to have a degree. I mean, that is a prerequisite just to show you can do it. But it's not as important to me as the other skills and experience and clarity of thought and writing and such like. So, I'm not, again, I like to think I'm not prejudiced against it, but it doesn't mean I don't think, oh, Oxbridge first, let's go for this one. It's not necessarily what we're looking for at all, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not terrible if you have it either, but it's just, I don't put that in as some sort of class of its own. They're just, at the end of the day, what we're looking for is people who can write and think and speak intelligently and clearly and with insight. And to do that, you don't necessarily need to have a PhD. In fact, possibly a PhD could also be a disadvantage potentially, because it can lead you into a style of writing which is just a bit too academic for a policy institute like Chatham House, potentially.
I completely agree with that, and I would tie that into the question one of the questions that we were asked. This question was, in my country, Mozambique, it's very hard to find a job because of the requirements, i.e. 5 years experience. How can young people overcome this barrier? Why I think that's quite similar to what you've just said, James, is that highlighting your qualifications. I know it's habit, and I know that historically this is how CVs have always been constructed. You need to add all the qualifications or certification that you received to show put your best foot forward. However, in our role, and I think in terms of Chatham House, we're not looking at qualifications. We are looking at those skills. We are looking at the experience you've gained. We are looking for the bits of information that make you stand out from someone else, and the skills and the experience that we need for the particular role that we're hiring for. So that ties into years of experience. Again, we don't pay attention to the number of years of experience, because 5 years experience to one person could be achieved by someone within only 2. It's all about how quickly you learn, how quickly you develop, and the opportunities that your different situation. So again, I'm not specifically talking about work experience, because experience starts off very early. It could come from volunteering experiences that you may have. It may involve tutoring. There's a lot of experience that you gain and demonstrate through being a tutor and being mentors, for example. So number of years experience for us is not essential criteria. Rather, what have you done that makes, that demonstrates that you can fulfill and take on this role that I have advertised. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, James.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. Think alike. Oh, sorry, feedback loop. Yeah. No. Anyway, no. Crack on, please.
Okay. Are there any other questions that you saw that you'd like us to discuss?
Me? Yeah. I mean, the questions that came through from Jonas in the United Kingdom. Sorry if I pronounced it incorrectly. Chisaki, United Kingdom. Samantha, Germany, and Matthews in Poland. I can happily go through those if you'd like me to, or a couple of them I can combine. I'm happy to do that if you'd like, Nonie, but it's up to you. You're in charge.
Yes, please. If you can go through, I think those are the more research process focused questions. So please go ahead.
I'll take a crack at them. I won't do it too long, because so you can fit other stuff in, or questions can come in on the chat function. But Jonas, I'm so sorry. how do think tanks balance theory and practice in their policy work? How is this evaluated in the hiring process? So I love this question because it's really easy, because there is no balance between theory and practice, because we do very little theory. Yes, it's important to understand, as you were taught in your degree, that the essentials of realism, liberalism, maybe even the basics of international relations theory, just because it's good background, it's good foundations. But the fact of the matter is this is not academia, and this is actually goes to another question, I think, somewhere, and I might have to repeat myself, or I'll try not to. But if you look at Chatham House writing, with the possible exception of international affairs, the academic journal that is based at Chatham House, but the papers that we produce almost never deal in theory, except possibly a vague reference to it. But so it's just, at the end of the day, the mission of Chatham House is to get across our research and analysis in a clearly accessible way. And if you're delving into saying, well, this doesn't fit the neo-constructivist theory of international relations, then, frankly, you're just going to turn anybody off, except the most dyed-in-the-wool IR theorist. So I'm thankful to say, because I wasn't very good at it when I was doing IR theory at university, I did do it, I did a course in it, but which is good, but I'm thankful to say that it's not something I balance, because I'm interested really in the more practical aspects of policy and events, I suppose. So that's hopefully that answers your question in a fairly direct manner, Jonas. How do you develop research skills? Chisaki asks. As an undergraduate student studying international relations, I'm very interested in pursuing a career in researching about international affairs. As a researcher and writer at Chatham House, how do you bring in academic and more specialized knowledge, and how is it different from news and article writing towards more public rather than academics? Do you think having a degree in international relations makes a difference in the quality of research, and if so, in what ways does it make a difference? Yeah, look, I am grateful, Chisaki, for my degree in international relations. I did a master's degree in international relations, and it gave me a wider field of vision than my Russia stuff. Yeah, so I do appreciate that. It does give me something. But again, I can't emphasize enough that we're not academia. We are at best a distant cousin of academia, and that life in a think tank and work and output of a think tank really is very different as I see it. Not that it's not rigorous analysis. I would reject any sort of snobbishness from academia that we are inferior in any way. But I do believe that, frankly, I'll be a little bit cutting here, and I think that the way in which we handle things and write and produce is simply more useful because of its more it's just closer to what policymakers and influencers need to hear and are able to read. They're not able to read, frankly, books, very, very long theoretical articles, and so I stand by the way in which Chatham House has evolved. I think it's evolved, some would say devolved, but evolved from being a quite stuffy research institute where everybody had a PhD and everybody was, I know I'm grey-haired and old, but everybody was a grey-haired old man. I do mean man, into something that's actually quite different today. I'm not saying we're perfect, but I do think that the increased diversity of what it was when I joined 20 years ago, to say nothing of Chatham House's longer history, has improved the communicativeness and accessibility and usefulness of our research. I hope that sort of answers your questions. But I do, that said, do an IR degree, yes. Stand out from the crowd, as Nonie was saying earlier. Yeah, a master's degree is quite helpful if you think that lots of other people have degrees and you want to stand out a little bit. That makes sense to me. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. But it is unfortunate, Chisaki, just last thing to say on this, is that unfortunately in universities, they don't really teach you short form writing. Your essays are what, 5,000 words, 10,000 words, 15, 20, I don't know. Whereas, an op-ed in a newspaper is 800 words, 500 words, and you're never taught that skill. And it's a real shame because means we have to bloody teach it, excuse my language, at Chatham House. And that is unfortunate, I have to say, because I was never asked to do that at university. So that's that one. So I've got two to go if you want me to carry on, Nonie. So Samantha, Germany, hi. How do you build a portfolio of consultancy experience and work examples as a young person to get into freelance consultancy work with NGOs and IOs? So, yeah, I'm just reading the next one to see if I can combine it. Yeah, so, well, it's actually very difficult to get started out. These questions are all related, of course. And for what it's worth, if you remember when I was saying in my opening remarks, Samantha, I was saying that, you know, how did I start out? And I started out as an administrator, doing no research whatsoever and no writing. And honestly, as I said, I've been at Chatham House for 20 years, and it probably took me 3 years to ask my first question in a round table, to have the courage to do that. Maybe 4 years to write my first article, which was actually a book review for international affairs. And then from international affairs, I did an article for the World Today, the in-house Chatham House magazine. And then you sort of graduate upwards. So it is small steps. I was not particularly, you know, talented or gifted in any way, but it is incremental steps. Some people do zoom in a little bit closer to the, you know, the top, if you like, not hierarchically speaking, but in research speaking. But it was very, very small, slow steps for me over a period of over a number of years, and I had to gain some confidence. And again, the mentoring came into it. In order to be able to, you know, speak. I would never have imagined when I started at Chatham House that I would be able to write and speak at conferences in a way in which I do. I would have told you it was never me. It's impossible. So if anybody's lacking in confidence, believe me, I certainly did back then. But there is a problem, of course, Samantha, which is that you need the experience to sort of get the job and to do the writing, and you need the writing and the job to get the experience, and that's a kind of a vicious circle of a problematically vicious circle. And again, all I would say is, if that is a trouble, that you're struggling to get the experience to get the job, or etc., then, you know, try and submit book reviews or small articles to various places to sort of get your foot on the ladder and to get your, you know, runs on the scoreboard, or whatever metaphor you want. And take it from there, because once you've built up one, you can then do another, and then you can begin to build up that sort of portfolio that you're talking about. By the way, you mentioned consultancy specifically, Samantha, and I do think consultants are actually quite good research fellows in think tanks, because they tend to write to limited, you know, because some people write, you know, they have sort of verbal diarrhea, and they write 25,000 words when they should be writing 10,000 words, and that's not particularly helpful to anybody. But consultants do tend to write, and consultancy is a good skill in the sense that you're writing to order, and you're writing to, you know, you're doing what presumably your corporate client perhaps tells you that they want, and that's quite a good skill, because, you know, even in university, I say, if you haven't answered the question, you know, you've just not done the right thing. And so often you see basic mistakes like, you know, just not answering the question, and so that's quite interesting. So then finally, Mathieu's from Poland, what is the process you would recommend following to become a think tank researcher? Sorry, yeah, hopefully I've answered that. To what extent is publishing, writing an essential career skill? How did I build up? Okay, so I think I've mostly answered that one through the other questions, Mathieu's. Only to say, I suppose that, look, there are various ways in. You can go in through administration. As I say, I started very junior. I think my boss, the director of Chatham House, Robin Niblett, as I understand it, he was an intern at a think tank in America, and he rose to become director of studies before he was director at Chatham House. So he started, if you like, on an even lower rung than I did, if that's, you know, if that's also all possible. And, you know, before that, I think he was in a band or something. So, you know, I think, you know, people's career paths can be unorthodox and unusual. Only to say that you know, that it is, you know, internships is actually a good one. I mean, because, you know, just internships these days, fortunately, are not as exploitative as they were. We do pay interns at Chatham House. There's a slight hiatus on it now because of COVID, and it's a bit difficult to do physically. But it, you know, an internship, I like interns as potential hirees, because in a way, an internship is a big job interview, and you get to know somebody much better over the course of their 3-month internship than you do in a 1-hour interview. So a lot of interns have become full-time Chatham House staff members, including researchers, because you show, you know, because you prove yourself during that internship, or you don't, but you know, hopefully you do. So that's if you like a tip. But don't come. I mean, what my over advice, I suppose, Matthew, is to say, don't come in thinking you're the best researcher in the world and you're going to write this book, because nobody wants that right now. Not right now. They might in the future, but you've got to sort of start out being as helpful as you can, pitching in where you can. Research assistants, which people ask for. Nailing down some research or some footnotes, citations. All of that shows that you have what it takes, I suppose, to be a fully fledged researcher. Again, which I never thought I had to start with. So there you go. So that's it for now, Nonie, but I'm happy to do anything else you like.
Okay, thank you for that. That's very informative, and I think that covers quite a few of the questions that we received. We did receive one question through the chat, which I think you've answered, from Jean, who asked, for someone who is new to policy making, what is the path to follow for her to succeed and get the job at the end? And I think you've pretty much covered that in your answer.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, except of course we're not in policy making. We advise on policy, and we are, we hope to be impactful and have a substantive impact and measure that impact, and that is the goal. That's the dream, if you like. Mm-hmm. But it isn't policy making. We're not that powerful. We'd like to be, and of course a lot of policymakers are frustrated writers, and a lot of writers are frustrated policymakers. But the grass is always greener and all that.
Okay, so just to go back to one question, I think I will go through the other CV related questions again. But one question that I'm keen to hear from you, James, was from, I think, Matthias again. And they asked, I would love to learn from a senior staff of CH if they face any glass ceilings in their careers. If yes, how do you face those?
Gosh, yeah, I mean, it's a tough question for me. I think because I don't feel that I have necessarily faced any prejudice in my career that I know that other people have. After all, I am a middle-class single white male, and that does not exactly make me into a particularly diverse or appropriate person, frankly, to answer this question. I mean, obviously, fortunately, for one reason or another, I happen to be instilled with liberal values, which means that I approach everybody equally and encourage diversity, as Chatham House really does and is making a real push on these days, and it's great to see. But I'm very conscious of the fact that it's important that my female researchers don't earn less than my male researchers, that and that there are possibilities for career development, and that if they want to go into research, that's great. If they don't, that's fine as well. If they want to do more project management and to rise up the sort of the research administration path that is available to them in Chatham House, then that is perfectly reasonable. Some people just don't have any desire to speak and to write, even if they want to be in the international relations world. So there are options, and you've got to decide what you want over time. And I really didn't know myself. So I think, to be honest with you, Nonie, I mean, you're a better person to talk about glass ceilings than I am. And it's I suppose one of the areas. I mean, Leah knows this. Leah's on the call somewhere. I am quite keen on making sure that my inclusivity and diversity is as rounded as it can possibly be on the program. Mm. And that's quite difficult in my region of Russia and Eurasia, because it's not exactly a particularly diverse region in some ways. I mean, you can argue that both ways, because obviously there's lots of ethnicities, for example, in the Caucasus and such like. But unfortunately, the people who go into the study of Russia and Eurasia tend not to be especially diverse. So it's a challenge that I have to ensure that. That's not necessarily so true with the genders, by the way. But it is true in other forms of diversity and inclusivity, and it's something you just have to constantly work on, and it's a never-ending thing. You never achieve perfection, I guess, but you can never be satisfied with what you have.
I think that answers that question pretty well, and I think the only thing that I would add to that from an HR piece, as you said, is that we continuously are driving engagement, and engagement applies to everyone at every level. That is, you are still happy, you wake up every day, you're happy doing your work, you're happy doing what you're doing, and where you feel that you are reaching a ceiling, there is opportunity to reach out to your, for example, line managers, or have a discussion with HR to see how else your skills can be used or developed across the institute. So there's definitely an opportunity for constant career development within the institute. Again, if research isn't your thing, then there's a lot of roles that we may have, that are focused on more, program coordination or management, for example. So I think the most important is, where we appreciate and value all our employees, we will do our most best to continue to ensure that they're, completely engaged in Chatham House and the work that they do, and also have opportunity to expand and develop, because the reality is the world that we live in requires people to have vast skills and vast experience, and you need to be able to, develop as, global trends continue to move forward. So I think that is it for now from the questions that we received on the platform. And I think we're happy to start accepting questions through the chat function.
So I can just say one thing, if you like, Nonie, while we wait for a question to come in. Although I probably can't hold it off. I probably can't hold it off forever. But just to say, Nonie, I mean, for what it's worth, one of the things that I appreciate most about Chatham House and my job, and I think not just my type of job, but almost everybody's, is the variety. So I never particularly wanted to be a full-time pure researcher, if you like, because it just, it just struck me as being too mono, too, just, just sitting all day writing makes Jack a dull boy. And I think that I've always appreciated the fact that, yes, I mean, people talk about what a pain fundraising is, for example, and that's true. It's not necessarily pleasant. But of course, partly what I would start would be that in order to do the things we like to do, you have to do some of the things you don't necessarily like to do. But more than that, I actually do quite like going to the corporate sector with a begging bowl, because that's just a different type of day to writing 800 words, which is a different type of day to sitting in a committee talking about the issues or about strategy, which is a different type of day to doing some media gig, which is a different type of day to traveling to country X to speak or to conduct some interviews. So variety really is the spice of life as far as think tank life is concerned, and I genuinely quite like that. I genuinely quite like that mix that is requisite. I mean, ultimately, I find that certainly in my role, and I think in a lot of roles, including in the program coordination role, as you were saying, Nonie, that juggling is quite a key skill. The ability to juggle between different, not just different tasks, but different skills within those tasks, if that makes any sense.
I think there's one question that we received on the platform that I think is quite important too. All of them were important, but I think this one, in light of the context, is quite a good one. So this came from Carolina in the UK, and the question is, given the current pandemic and following digital transformation, which shifted a big part of human interaction to online webinars, does this carry an impact towards hindering the direct networking? Can this practice prove sustainable for career development? So in my opinion, with that particular question, I think the shift to the virtual world is working because there is no choice but to adapt to our current situation. Does it mean training and becoming aware and conscious of presentation or how you present yourself through the virtual webinars such as Zoom and others? Yes, definitely, there is training available to teach you about how you can maneuver on the different platforms available. I think it has carried on. We've had to, again, adapt to providing career development virtually. So, for example, if I think of our HR team, we've continued with providing a training through, for example, LinkedIn training. It has taken away, though, the face-to-face in-house training that we would bring into the building. However, what we've done is adapt that to tailoring that through our learning and development, as well as, again, I think it's a good thing that we've offered upskilling or sharing skills across the institute where there's a lack of a certain skill. For example, in a certain research program, you know, people can offer to assist those and work together to making sure that we're continually sharing those skills to make us as effective and as efficient as we can be. We've continued to convene through virtually as well, and that is still going well. I think where we don't have the option of, you know, face-to-face meetings or interviewing or engagement, we are finding that we, you know, have adapted pretty well, considering we had to do it very rapidly, and we are proving to be effective in that regard.
Yeah, I didn't hear the entire question, Nonie, because my computer blanked out, but I understood it to be about the, you know, how work was in COVID times, roughly, as I understood it from your answer. And I agree with everything you said. It's been a question of adaptation. It's not ideal, frankly. I mean, this is, you know, obviously disastrous in so many ways. And we have all had to adapt, and I think quite astonishingly, to the new reality. And whilst nobody wants to go back to how it was precisely, then I think, you know, a return to a physical world, if you like, you know, would bring those advantages in the research world too, because I feel I'm missing out on something now. I mean, I haven't met anybody in my field, you know, on a one-to-one or, you know, physically for, you know, since March now, and that means you know, it's not just so much, it's not so much body language, but, you know, a lot of the things that you do when you in the research process, like when you're in conferences, you know, you chat to people, you learn about what's going on in the field. You know, even if it's rumors or gossip, or but I mean really about, and of course you don't really do that on the Zoom meetings. And whilst we've done, you know, we still maintain the same number of meetings in the Zoom world as we did back when we were at Chatham House at the building. And so, you know, you can argue that, you know, if you do the metrics of it, then nothing has changed. And indeed, you can say there's been some improvements, because obviously if you are doing it on Zoom, then you can, you know, we have people, you know, from Australia or the US and Kazakhstan all at the same time, even regardless of time difference, you know, on the meetings, who simply wouldn't come. So you can expand your audience and get better dissemination, get better outreach that way. So it's been advantageous in that way. But I do feel personally that we've lost something, and I do hope that we can get back to it, or get back to some form of hybrid reality, you know, as soon as possible. But it is what it is.
Thanks for that, James. Okay, so we'll turn to the questions that we've received through the chat. I would like to invite Aurora Andrew from the UK to unmute, to turn your screen on and unmute yourself and ask the question. I think you had a couple of questions, so we invite those.
Yeah, so my question was just with in regards to unpaid internships. It's quite hard if you can't afford to do them. So what other experience would you suggest doing, or suggest for us to do? Yeah.
I think it really depends on, you know, what your situation is. So if you've, have you recently finished university, or are you still studying? What's your situation?
I only have a year left. Yeah, I'm still studying.
I think a lot of people, I know financially it may be difficult not to take, to not really focus on the unpaid internships. But I know, I mean, speaking from our position here at Chatham House, you know, our internships are paid.
Yeah.
I will tell you what that looks like. We do pay for those. But I do also feel that a lot of people, or I think in our world, you know, don't really value those voluntary positions anymore. there's so much skill and there's so much learning that can be done through volunteering, because I've seen and I've been, you know, in contact with individuals who have, for example, reached out to certain institutions or organizations for a voluntary position. So it could be, for example, program coordinator or program assistant volunteering positions.
Okay.
Those are so worthwhile, because that on your CV will set you apart from someone who has no experience at all. So I know it's quite difficult to take an unpaid role, but I think, you know, I think it's a balance between where you want to direct your career and what opportunities are available. So there are definitely institutes such as ours who do offer, you know, paid internships. Also look out for roles that are, you know, again, I know it's not always ideal coming out of university and taking a fixed term contract, for example, 3 months or 6 month fixed term contract. However, if that is enhancing and building on those skills and those experience that you want to further develop personally, and again through you know, whatever role that you move into, it is a constant learning thing. It is a self-development. So whilst an employer or an employer can offer you career development, that development is entirely, you know, up to you. It's basically in your control as to how you want to shape that or steer that. So that constant learning, be it voluntary, be internship. I know, you know, there are a few that are a bit, you know, are unpaid, but there are, you know, there are definitely more opening up to offering some sort of stipend.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Alex, James, you wanted to add to that?
Well, I mean, I can't do as much as you can. Only to say that, I mean, as you know, Nonie, then, you know, Chatham House came to the paid internships thing relatively late. We were perhaps a bit slow off the mark. You know, we're not perfect, and we realised there were people like Eurasia out there, and it was unfair if we were offering all the jobs to people who simply could afford to work for free for whatever reason that might be. And so we did this thing about it. And it's not easy, you know, to give Chatham House its due. It's not easy. Chatham House is always cash strapped. Money is tight. And so we didn't think we could afford it, but then we felt it was more important for us to do it, even if we couldn't quite afford it, than to not do it at all. Because sometimes you just got to not be too obsessed about the money and the bank balance sometimes in order to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, so it's, you know, give us our due, but also a bit slow perhaps. And so I'm much more comfortable with it now in my head, having taken my own time to get around it, because I'm a budget holder and I think to myself about the money as well. No, I will not pay for an intern. I could have had it work for free, important. But you have to get over that as a manager and think to yourself, well, I'm going to have to spend, to do the right thing. So, you know, there are some people have just got to come around to that way of thinking, and organisations are coming around to that way of thinking. Maybe not fast enough for Eurasia, because organisations are slow, even the best of them. So, yeah, to answer your question, what else can you do? I go back to one of my previous answers. If you can sort of find yourself, find it in yourself to submit to offer articles, if it's for research thing, or to see where, you know, you can be of assistance without actually doing some sort of unpaid exploitative work, but nonetheless sort of to make yourself, you know, seen and useful, you know, then that again is that first rung which gets you onto the, you know, the proper career path. It's you know, and so yeah, I again, just on my own experience, I was at the beginning so happy to get a job in what was even related to Russia, Eurasia, which I'd studied and been to the country and that kind of stuff, you know, but I was quite happy to, you know, when my boss said to me, look, you will have to, you know, I know you speak the language, James, he said, but I mean, you know, you're gonna have to do some photocopying and some you know, Excel work or whatever. And I said, sure, just give me the job. And I mean, I didn't say quite like that, obviously, but but I was quite happy to, you know, to not go in at that sort of, you know, researcher level and to not come in saying, you know, I do remember one intern I interviewed once who said, obviously I wouldn't want to do any menial stuff, or I wouldn't want to do any photocopying or anything like that. And we sort of we felt that, you know, that person, you know, felt that it was below him, and so yeah, they didn't actually get the job in the end, because it wasn't. So it is helpful to make yourself as helpful as possible, I suppose.
Agreed. There's another question that we have from Samantha Gordon, and this is around equal opportunity employers. The question essentially is, so when it comes to chronic illnesses that are not considered to be disabilities in terms of legislation or government, how do we as HR and the organisation being inclusive, engage with candidates who may consider themselves to have a chronic disability or a chronic impairment, and what should this person or should people mention a chronic illness as a disability during the application process, and would this have any negative repercussions, and how flexibly do organisations or companies regard the term disability? So in terms of our hiring process, we do from the word go, because again, it's not to exclude you from the process, it's more being prepared and being able to accommodate everyone if we are progressing them to the interview stage. So what we do ask is if there is any chronic illness or disability that we should be aware of, we do ask you to, obviously reveal that to us. So especially if we are progressing to a point where we are interviewing, would that be held against you? Absolutely not, because the reason we are progressing you and your application is based solely on your skills and experience that we've seen are important to what we're looking for. And obviously, if it is something that would, work towards, having a conversation about more flexible working, again, we are entirely open to that. This is a discussion we are open to. And, again, back to the context where we are all working from home at the moment, that has, we were already working flexibly before, but I think what we are actually appreciating now is that we can work, it's not ideal, however, we can still work effectively from home. So if there is a chronic illness, be open with the HR team. From our perspective, we wouldn't use that against you, because again, I can't emphasize how important it is to remind people that if you are being invited for an interview, it is based on your skills and your experience and the value that we think you would add to our team. I don't know if you have anything further to say to that, James.
Yeah, I don't have that much. Oops, sorry, I don't know. You hear me? I don't have that much experience other than to say that, we take everything on its merits, and that, Chatham House, I think, increasingly tries to, again, we're not, I don't think I should tell you we're perfect. Yeah. Hope you don't mind me saying that, Nonie, but I think I think that, we've been trying more and more in recent years to be as understanding as possible. I mean, it's obviously, I'll just say, pregnancy, for example, is not a chronic illness, so I'm not comparing them, but I've had my colleagues who have become who've become pregnant, and we're very good. I think I'd like to think we're very good with understanding that they have their year's maternity leave. They can come back. They can't come back. We're very understanding of it as a legal requirement, but hopefully you can go beyond the legal requirements and do that, but much more to support them and in their careers. It's not exactly. So I'm not comparing the two. It's not exactly the same, but I'd like to think that Chatham House is just trying, with Nonie's help and her team's help, to be as understanding as possible to all sort of, to every eventuality, if you like.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I think we've got Fundile who is still on the call. Can we invite you? I know we are running a little bit late, but I think this is some, really good question from Fundile. So Fundile, if you can turn on your camera and unmute yourself.
Just wanted to say thank you so much for the insight so far. It's been very interesting. I have a quick question for James, and this is a question of mentorship. I think before you...
Can you speak up? I'm so sorry, I can hardly hear you, Fundile.
Sure. I can, I'll just speak closer.
Thanks.
So my question is about mentorship, and in particular, that you were able to have mentors over your time period at Chatham. I was just going to ask a question of what is the best way, do you think, for someone to ask for a mentorship or to ask someone to mentor them? It might not necessarily be directly, but in what ways can someone be helpful, I think?
Yeah. That is a good question, because it's not. Do you mean somebody who is outside of the organization asking somebody inside the organization, or do you mean somebody who's inside asking somebody who's inside?
Inside and inside.
Okay. That's a bit easier then. Because yeah, the implication behind your question, I think, is that researchers, senior researchers, if you like, program directors, whatever, they're all busy people, and that's absolutely true. So do they want to invest, their time in somebody? But and I think, again, I've changed my view on this over time, and as I said, because nowadays, one of the best parts of my job is frankly working with younger people from the region whom I employ as academy fellows and junior research fellows within the Russia and Eurasia program, and it's just become sort of a bright spot of my job over the years. So these days, I genuinely thrive on it, because actually it's a two-way process, and you learn from them because they probably already know a lot. So I think most people, inside to inside, would be very amenable. It would almost be a natural thing in a way, because I don't know what your field is or what your specific interests are, but if for example, you were in Chatham House and you were working on a region which is connected to my region, or an area connected to my area, then I think people would be only too happy to do it, and you simply have to ask, or it's a natural thing anyway. So to be honest with you, it's perhaps not. I'd be interested in Nonie's view about how formalized it should be, because it's maybe not as formalized as it might be, the mentoring. Certainly with me, it wasn't at all. When I had my mentors, I learned from it by a sort of a waking osmosis, as I was saying, whereby I looked at what they were doing, I looked at them giving lectures and speeches and presentations, and read their writing, and I learned that way from them. So they weren't necessarily, they were mentoring me, especially as it went on, but it was almost that I taught myself from them, if that makes any sense. So but that's not quite good enough, and it's important, frankly, for people in my position to spend time with the writing, for example, or the presentational skills, but let's say the writing of people such as yourself and junior fellows in the Russia and Eurasia program, to help them to frankly to try and be a more effective think tanker. So again, if it's inside to inside, then I would hope that every single researcher in Chatham House, at whatever level, feels able to do that on a informal or formal basis, and that's a different question, and I'd be interested in Nonie's view. As I say, if it's outside to inside, it's a bit harder, because of course there is a simple time capacity thing, and if someone externally were to say, "Can you just be my mentor?" I'd have to think very seriously about it, because I've got a job and hopefully a life and that kind of stuff, and that does become a bit more difficult if I'm already mentoring people inside Chatham House, and I do sympathise in that respect. But over to Nonie as to whether she thinks that that mentoring inside Chatham House should be formal or informal. I don't know if you have a view, Nonie.
I don't think it's formalized at the moment in Chatham House. I think it's more so, as you said, if you've got, if there's a real interest, and if there's a shared interest, then, that direct approach is always a good way to do that. So again, it could be, could we have a conversation? I'd be keen to have a quick chat if you're available, just to discuss this, and that could lead to the conversation about potential mentorship, where you know your skills and experience aligns to that individual. Then definitely approach them. I always say to myself that the injustice that you do yourself is not asking the question, because the worst thing or the worst case would be you getting a no. So rather knock on that door than not trying at all. Thank you. So I know we've overrun just a little bit, but I do appreciate the community for joining James and I today. It's been really good.